Today's talk is love every day. And the reason it came up is because on Friday it's Valentine's Day. And as I was thinking that as the reading was going on, I was like, take that, Valentine's Day. Because sometimes, I mean, it's absolutely wonderful to recognize those people who are special in our lives. You know, to get all the fun stuff, the candy and the cards and the special dinners and the wonderful nights out, or whatever you're going to do if you're doing that for Valentine's Day, or perhaps it's hoping somebody's going to ask you to do that for Valentine's Day, wherever we happen to be in the phase of our life. And it's really good to recognize and honor that special time, that special connection, because those intimate connections, those ones that we call our loved ones, they're the ones who open us up. Right? I mean, we've got into some relationship in those situations where our ego walls just crumbled and all of a sudden we were part of something bigger, part of a duo rather than just being isolated in our own lives. And that's a really wonderful thing to recognize. But there's a truth back of that, which is that, in fact, we are all that connected if we allow ourselves to be. If we're willing to open up and move past the fears that isolate us in our consciousness into actually loving every day. So I don't know how everybody else experiences this, so I'm just going to reflect on my experiences. Have you ever been in a situation where you think, I could be loving, but if I do that, I'm going to have to be obligated to this? Right? And so maybe you don't act as lovingly as you had first envisioned when some situation came to you, confronted you with this opportunity where you could act lovingly. But what if they don't receive my love? What if I get rejected? What if my feelings get hurt if I commit to this? And how much time am I going to have to put into this? How much of my life do I have to give over to this if I act in love here? And often, that can stop us from doing something. Anybody ever notice that? It's like, yeah, no, I'm not going to give him that quarter. Because that might be an obligation. I'm not going to say yes to that date, because that might be the rest of my life. They may not be the right one. Interestingly, in New Thought, there's only one. So it could go a lot of different ways. And our fear rises up that separates us out from the opportunity to experience a deeper connection. And that's okay. We are all where we are. And that just means that we have an opportunity to choose to be somewhere else if that's not what we want. If we want to have joyous, loving relationships, we actually have to start having joyous, loving relationships. Because it's a great idea, right? Everybody wants to feel loved. That's a basis of human nature. We want to be connected with other people. We want to alleviate the feeling of isolation in our own head, that we're out here alone. Sometimes it's the need for friends, and sometimes it's the need for intimacy, and sometimes it's the need for community. And in New Thought, we talk a lot about when we need something, the universe says yes to our needing something. Because we haven't developed a better idea of what it is that we desire. So we feel like we need something, and we power that need with all of our thinking about it. And guess what? That fulfills all the requirements of a practical prayer. So when you're feeling a desperate need for something, the universe is saying, yes, here, have some more desperate need. And all of the experiences that are drawn to us reinforce that idea, and it becomes a positive feedback loop in a negative way. So one of the things we can do is we can actually become mindful of our loving attitude. Anybody here ever take for granted a loving situation?
Oh, yeah.
A friendship, a marriage, a relationship? Yeah, I mean, we can all get into that comfortability where we're feeling, okay, you know, this is a set deal. I don't really need to put any time or effort into it. I've been married for 32 years, you know, and I can fall into that really quickly sometimes. It's like, that'll be there, you know. But that's not being mindful of the love that is being shared in that situation or in any of my relationships, in any of the ways that I interact with the world. So if we become mindful, that actually requires of us to ask ourselves, am I being loving in this situation? Which leads to the question often, what is loving in this situation? So, because sometimes it's the nice feathers and sometimes it's the sword in the feathers that's going to come out. It really depends on how we ask ourselves and how we become open to what the answer is. Have you ever had a situation, I know I've had a couple in my life, where I want to be loving, and my version of loving goes way towards kindness and compassion. And when I go way towards kindness and compassion, sometimes that loving becomes enabling. And it's actually producing the opposite of what I am trying to give. And it's really a scary kind of place to be, but I want to be loving and kind. But sometimes love needs to be firm. It needs to be standing in a truth. It needs to be standing up for a truth and being counted with that truth. Sometimes we actually need to take actions that feel difficult for us or challenging for us so that the true love that we have for a person or a situation or a world can be expressed and to move us forward. Every time I do this talk somewhere around love or Valentine's Day, I have to bring up my first functional definition of love. And I found this, 20 years ago, and I've always used it as a touchstone for whether or not I am being loving in a situation. So it's from M. Scott Peck's A Road Less Traveled. And it is actually a very firm definition of love, because we have lots of definitions of love that are all that warm and fuzzy side, right? Oh, it's love when I buy flowers. And it may be, that's true. Or whatever other activity it is. So his definition of love is the willingness to extend oneself for the spiritual growth of oneself or another. That's actually a pretty stern definition of love. Mm-hmm. It requires that I do something rather than just receive something. It requires me to be accountable to the thoughts, actions, and feelings that I am having in any given situation, and to bring those into some kind of intelligent focus for use in my relationship, right? So if I'm going to extend myself spiritually, I may need to get out of some thinking that I am having to get into something of a higher nature, right? I call this the love word journey, and it's part of mindfulness. And have this kind of balance of about 4 or 5 things that I kind of test this against. First of all, am I rejecting something? Right? So it's really hard to be loving when you're talking about hate, or thinking about it, or disparaging, or all of the variations that go along with hate, which is the rejection of some situation, place, or person that you feel is unjust, or whatever your reason for it is. You've rejected that that's what the situation is, and so it's easy to objectify it and try to hate it. Right? If you are there, it is impossible to be in hate and love at the same time. They are absolutely incompatible. Because what you're doing is you're focusing on all of the negativity that you, quote, don't want, and the universe is saying yes. So it's going to give you more situations that are going to build up onto that negativity so that you can bring yourself to a boiling rage with the injustice of it all, or the resentment that you've decided to run over in your head so many times that it has just become a litany. So the first thing is to get out of rejection in the mind and to move into tolerance. That's the first step in the love word journey. Now, tolerance is a very interesting thing, Tolerance is rejecting at a distance. See, I can tolerate something and still disagree with it and point to it, and because I'm on a 21-day no complaining feast, I'm not going to tell you what I would usually say when I'm being tolerant of somebody else's bad behavior, right? Or some other situation's bad behavior. So I have to move farther into this depth of what am I resistant against here? What is not love in my consciousness? Now, I can discern that something is right or wrong, but I still have to look in myself to find what is the loving thing to do here, to be here in this situation. So if I see an injustice, it's not to sit there and complain about the injustice or to let the injustice go unchallenged in life, but to turn around and say, where do I need to stand in my truth about this? And how do I need to do that positively as an expression of love? Right? Because when we stand in our truth of the authenticity of the love that is inherent in us, we have all of the power that there is to move mountains through the individual channel of who we are. And so we move from tolerance to acceptance. The part about acceptance is accepting that situations are where they are. We are where we are, without judging, without criticizing, without going down the negative road of this is terrible, and it's to just say, okay, this is where we are, what can be done? Now we've accepted a situation at face value for what it is, and it frees us from all preconceptions about what that situation is, because most of the times when we're not accepting a situation, it's because it's not conforming to our illusion of what we think the world is. You know? And if we want to be loving in our life, and we want to experience love in our life, we have to get rid of a couple of illusions, usually, when we find ourselves hating in any of its given forms. So if we can get to a place of acceptance, it gives us the freedom to move forward into what is next. And then, here's where new thought comes in. Really kind of cool thing. What is it I want? Because a lot of times we spend a great deal of our energy and effort figuring out what it is we don't want without ever identifying what it is that we do want. And if we haven't identified what we do want, how in the world do we expect to get there? How would you know if you did? Right? Well, you may, because it was warm and fuzzy, or you may actually have a clear mental equivalent of what it is that you want to be experiencing in life instead of the thing that you don't want, and move in that direction. And that can open us up. And I like to put this in the relationship that we all have with each other and the people around us, because we live, move, and have our being not only as spiritual beings in a spiritual world, but as physical beings on this planet in this moment, with all of the things going on and all of the people we come in contact with, in all of the ways that we come in contact with them. So within that network of experiences that we have, if we want to have more love in our life, we have to be more love in that network. And that comes down to compassion and kindness. See, love is never negative. It's an idea of spiritual development for the unfolding of a greater understanding for ourselves and for someone we love. And the greater we get into compassion and kindness, the greater grows the sphere of our influence of that compassion and kindness. The less the fear surfaces. When we're working in a field of unconditional love, which is the truth of what we're working in, that infinite spiritual unconditioned love that we are finding and being the channels of it coming through into the world, when we're working in that world and in that understanding, fear recedes. Because my experience has been that when I act in kindness and compassion, regardless of whether the kindness and compassion is accepted, regardless of whether it is received or rejected, I have made my life and the life of the planet better by acting in compassion and kindness, by being the love I wish to receive in the world. And what I have found is that if it is not accepted from one quarter, it comes from another. Because the universe is responding. It may just not be responding the exact way that I want it to. Because if I've outlined exactly what it is, I've tried to limit a universal power and universal force into a very small mold. It's got ways of doing things that I can't even begin to imagine. Like, they're probably doing it differently around Alpha Centauri. You know, it's a big place, this universe. And so I don't need to limit that. But when I've moved into compassion and kindness, I start to open my eyes a little bit to the unity of life. And this is where love leaves off on the individual experience and starts becoming the consciousness and the awareness, that thing that we call agape love, which is love of life itself in all of its forms, in all of its conditions. And in being in that agape love, where I can move and act as love in each moment, then I can bring that forward into the world. Now, the people who have done this in human history, they have names that have founded religions because of the level that they were able to understand the unity of life and the allness of love. Now, I'm not pointing fingers at the moon and saying, look at the finger. I'm saying, look at the moon. The moon is love. And all of those avatars of spiritual understanding were all pointing at the same moon and saying these are different ways by which you can get there. So in New Thought, we don't advocate any particular version of that. You know, that's a personal journey on whichever one's going to bring it to you. But we do know that our thoughts are causative. And so if we have thoughts that are causing love, that are acting upon love, that are bringing love into our lives, we are going to receive that from the universe in all of its various forms. And if we enlarge our idea of that to the idea that we are all one, we are all that special one, we are all deserving of flowers and candies and really cool dinners, then we can move in the world and move the world towards an actual spiritual evolution. Be a kind of good place to be. So I'll leave you this with this little thing. A little love is good. It truly is. A lot of love is God. Namaste.